congressmen, congresswomen, Virginia senators, state delegates, the mayor of Hampton, council members, legislative support staff, ministers, community leaders, all to recognize and celebrate the first official Juneteenth holiday in Virginia. Therefore, on behalf of the Fort Monroe Authority and the National Park Service, I welcome all of you to this historic property on this historic day and pray that you will be moved by this program and touched by the courage of those that went before us. As we continue our program, please join me in welcoming Shadra Pittman from the Sankofa Project as she provides a call to the ancestors.
Greetings. Greetings. Ah, there you are. Can you hold that for me? Thank you, Mayor Tuck. It was on this land where we now stand, Turtle Island, where the people known as the Kickitan lived. Their lives would be forever changed, forevermore, when the settlers arrived at the shores. It was on this land where we now stand that 20 and odd Africans, Ndongo, Angola people came on the White Lion, landed at Point Comfort. I always say it's not comfortable to those for whom slavery chose. It was on this land where we now stand that in 1861, 3 brave men petitioned for their right to be free, and thus burst the contrabands in American history. And now on this land where we now stand, we remember the Africans of Galveston that learned that on tomorrow they would be free from the shackles and the stench of slavery. We remember them. Nina Simone once asked that, what does freedom mean? She said, freedom means no fear, having no fear. The Book of Ani tells us that, thank you, tells us that to pour libations is to call on our mothers and fathers in the land of the dead. It's okay. Can you? Okay. Thank you. To pour on our mothers and fathers of the land of the dead. So bon dia dumele ete senidia che saubana hadibadi. We are here calling on the Great Spirit, the supreme beings, the divine ancestors. We pour to the mothers and fathers of civilization. We pour to those of ancient Kemet. We pour to those who were on the enslavement ships. We pour to those who walked off the enslavement ships, jumped into the Atlantic Ocean. We pour to Adam Clayton Powell. We pour to Carter G. Woodson. We pour to Ida B. Wells, to Chief Seattle. We pour to Nat Turner. We pour to all those named and unnamed. We pour to Frederick Douglass. We pour to Medgar Evers. We pour to Patrice Lumumba. We pour to the people of Tulsa, of Rosewood, of Elaine, of Charleston, North Carolina, of Charleston, South Carolina. We pour to all those as we remember the end of slavery on this day. On this journey to Juneteenth, we remember from Fort Monroe, from the Geechee, South Carolina to Galveston, Texas. We remember the Africans who the world forgot. We remember the massacre. We remember Standing Rock. We remember the ancestors and Audre Lorde who told us our silence would not protect us. We remember the cells they took from Henrietta Lacks. We remember Sally Hemings. We remember the women of Dr. Marion Sims, Anarcha, and Lucy who were experimented on without any anesthesia. We remember from Martin on the balcony. We remember Malcolm in the ballroom. We remember Medgar in his driveway. We remember Breonna Taylor in her apartment. We remember the named and the unnamed. As we are here today, beloveds, we must remember that in order to acknowledge history, we have to do as Ida B. Wells said and have the courage to face it head on. We must look at the critical race theory. We must look at reparations. We must look at all of these things. We are a humanity. We are, as humans, Homo sapiens. We are one race. And on this day, we honor the Africans of Juneteenth. Ashe. Ashe.
I knew how it would feel to be free, and I wish I could break all the chains holding me, and I wish I could say all the things that I should say them loud, say them clear for the whole world to hear. I wish I could share all the love that's in my heart, remove all the bars that keep I could give. I'm longing to give, and I wish I could live. I'm longing to live, and I wish I could do all the things that I can do. Though way overdue, time is starting to move. But I wish I could be like a bird up in the sky, and how sweet it would be if I found I could fly, and I soar to the sun. Then I look down at the sea, and I sing 'cause I know, and I sing 'cause I know, and I sing 'cause I know every man should be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more sorrow, no more sorrow, no more sorrow over me. And before I be a slave, I'd be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more crying, no more crying, no more crying over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Everybody sing, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Wow, what a moment today is. My name is Yola Dance, and I am the acting superintendent here at Fort Monroe National Monument. And I am so pleased to bring greetings on behalf of the National Park Service as we all gather together and reflect on 156 years of communities across the nation coming together in celebration of freedoms gained during and following the Civil War. When we think about the legacy of abolitionists, from freedom seekers, United States colored troops, and brave individuals who chose and fought for freedoms gained and hoped for, we must remain encouraged. And so I think about those celebrations in Washington, D.C. following the preamble to the Emancipation Proclamation, the Emancipation Day in Norfolk, Virginia on January 1st, in Richmond, Virginia, and ultimately Galveston, Texas. Here we are today, witnessing history as we commemorate the first national Juneteenth Independence holiday. Great work and efforts have gone into making such an act of remembrance possible, and great work continues as we preserve historic places like Fort Monroe and tell all American stories. Join me now in welcoming Dr. Khalida Fairfax.
Now you all know I'm about to bring this funk, don't you? You know I'm about to bring this funk. Listen to me. In recognizing Juneteenth in the Commonwealth, we must remember that it is an observance created by black people, just as Freedom's Eve, which we call Watch Night, Emancipation Day you just heard about, Decoration Day we normally refer to as Memorial Day. Symbolic of freedom, humanity, cultural, creative, and economic agency, and liberty to be able to exist on one's own terms. So when we talk about enslavement, remember it is an interruption of African culture. You never start off our history with enslavement. You started off with African history, African culture. Be mindful that people of African descent in the Commonwealth seized freedom for themselves, which underscored the depth of our consciousness about freedom. Juneteenth requires us to reflect upon the voices of the 19th century. When we speak about the issue of freedom, can you say freedom for me? Freedom. This is the first time so many of us have been out since the pandemic. It is fitting that we talk about freedom. Don't you feel a little bit free? Just a little bit, just a tiny bit free. Can you say freedom for me? Can you say freedom for me? Freedom to those who are held in bondage transcends country boundaries because it is a human, spiritual, and metaphysical phenomenon, Dr. Swan. Between the 1700s and 1800s, for example, thousands of African people endured intense heat, bites from mosquitoes and venomous snakes, living in the dismal swamp, as not to endure violence and bestiality from white owners. In 1831, Nat Turner believed that he was chosen by God to bring about Judgment Day and lead his people to freedom, and decided, based upon an eclipse in the sun, you know that's science, there was time to fight back. Henry Box Brown concealed himself in a shipping box, which was mailed from Richmond to Philadelphia in March of 1849. So although one may rest with the tragedy of history, that people had to go to the most uttermost lengths to be free, we see these acts as reflective of what Juneteenth is about. You just heard about those who are referred to by contraband. Dr. Wiggins, I see you. In May 1861, Frank Baker, Shepard Mallory, James Townsend took their freedom, presented themselves here on these grounds to Benjamin Butler, of which thousands of Africans followed them here to Freedom's Fortress, and they were called contraband. And contraband may not mean you free, it means you're not somebody else's property. In 1874, Virginia's first black U.S. Congressman, John Mercer Langston, the founder of the Howard University Law School, Alexis, who we don't talk about enough, I'll offer his words. Freedom and free institutions should be as broad as our continent. Among no nation, here or there, should there be found any enslaved or oppressed. Compromises between right and wrong, under pretense of expediency, should disappear forever. And Booker T. Washington, another Virginian who we don't talk enough about, in his 1901 autobiography, Up From Slavery, he anticipated the coming of the Emancipation Proclamation, and he yielded this prediction in a few hours. The great question with which the Anglo-Saxon race had been grappling with for centuries have now been thrown upon my people to be solved. So what we learned from voices of the 19th century is that how freedom is articulated is a very distinct human, spiritual, and metaphysical phenomena, because citizenship and privilege are always tenuous, given that the governing structure hasn't changed since then. They understood that freedom of black people would be our own burden and not shared equally or equitably where whites and blacks experience freedom's fullness. Governor Northam's historic legislative laws were necessary, should be continued, and are foundational to the policy work that remains. Because in our Commonwealth, when we acknowledge Juneteenth, we learn and see how our ancestors transcended human bondage by taking their freedom. And we sorrowfully comprehend the violence, the brutality of enslavement, jurisprudence, and social institutions. So Juneteenth should be an inflection point not an electric slide, not a hashtag. Juneteenth ought to be an inflection point where we affirm how our ancestors responded to the bondage of slavery, took away those bondages of slavery through what? Action building of our spiritual and worship traditions, our communities, and our societies, while simultaneously bearing witness to devastating rituals of human denial from generation to generation to generation. When we build our communities and societies, and they are disrupted by social policies of Jim Crow, of urban renewal, of gentrification, of diminished funding and helping service industry mechanisms and community development processes, of disparaging school curricula that doesn't reflect our beauty and who we are, y'all don't hear me, and elusive decision-making, available positions on boards and corporations, locality budgets that don't support our businesses, don't support meaningful institutions, and don't support our events, and unequitable access to large forms of power. This is the symbolism of Juneteenth. Again, it's not a hashtag, it's not an electric slide moment. It is a compelling moment about what? About what? About freedom. So as I take my seat, let the Commonwealth's response then to how Juneteenth is enacted be equally powerful to what freedom should be to all people. Historic justice must be matched with economic and political justice. You can't get over it, you can't get around it. You can't get under it, you can't get next to it. Historic justice must be matched with economic and political justice. So Juneteenth is that inflection moment for all of us, matched with actions about freedom. I appreciate you all today. Thank you so much. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, who is our Virginia Poet Laureate, Dr. Igloria, who will present Dear America. She is the Louis Jaffe Endowed Professor, University Professor of English and Creative Writing at Old Dominion University. She has received several notable honors over the past 20 years and was just recently selected by the Academy of American Poets as one of our 2021 Academy Fellows. Please welcome Dr. Louisa A. Igloria.
Good morning, everyone, on this historic occasion. Thank you so much, Dr. Fairfax, for your inspiring words and for the warm introduction. Governor Northam and esteemed guests, as the Commonwealth's Poet Laureate, I am very honored to be part of today's historic event. We are here to commemorate the emancipation of all those enslaved in the history of this country. Though the first Juneteenth was celebrated 156 years ago, active remembrance is no less and perhaps even more important in this time because of the continuing struggles of Black people to dismantle centuries of systemic violence and deprivation. In solidarity, I have chosen to read an original poem, part of a series of letter poems I started writing in the middle of this pandemic year, entitled Dear America, or American Dream. The poem is also about the dangers of forgetting. Dear America. And now that we're told we have the dream, how do we make sure it doesn't deteriorate into a substandard or lapsed edition, or heaven forbid, a bootleg copy manufactured in a third world sweatshop of the dream? And is this set of papers the guarantee to which we have affixed at the bottom of every page and on every margin of every page the semblance of a seal, i.e. our John Hancocks, our signatures in ink whose upswept tails testify to our consent to the terms and conditions set forth thereby? Have we observed the proper decorum? that heady mixture conjoined of nervousness concealed under uncertain pride? Are we to believe your plumply jovial representatives, all pinstriped and suited up in black like undertakers, which they are in a manner of speaking, since it is admittedly such a large undertaking to raise one's right hand and solemnly swear before the book, the chair, the one holding the gavel in the chair, the alabaster one, whose eyes are shielded by a blindfold. Oh, most cool lady whose face never registers the difficulty of holding up those scales. Does the dream we've been granted taste, smell, and handle like the ones our neighbors have? Does each of us down the block and around the city have the same level plot to cultivate, make, multiply, pull up by the bootstraps? What kinds of fences exist in the dream? And are there border guards who will check and check through our documents so we've surrendered them more than a minimum times required, while others go on to pick up square after square of reward, never once being sent back, tasered, choked, wrenched from the arms off, sent to jail or detention, or disappeared or told to go back? To start, do not pass go. And this, as you know, is history. Our people making their way through fields and orchards, shimmering like some kind of wet with dew or gold with sunset dream, their hands bleeding the grass as they go. Our children turning around and around in your funhouse mirror tunnels of the dream, lined with foil sheets and tinny music, turning repeatedly into each other, running repeatedly into each other, until one day the dream makes them forget who they were. Thank you. Now I am so pleased to introduce Dr. Janice Underwood, who serves as the first Secretary-level Chief Diversity Officer for the Commonwealth of Virginia. This is also the first position of its kind in the nation. Under Dr. Underwood's leadership, Virginia has launched the One Virginia statewide strategic plan to build diversity-led innovation across more than 100 state agencies. She also leads the Health Equity Task Force, which launched the first ever equity dashboards, synthesizing 6 social determinants of health at both the state level and across 133 localities in Virginia. But I know Dr. Underwood best perhaps from the time she spent at Old Dominion University not too long ago, where she was already doing the deep and important work of listening, engaging, and encouraging others to work toward real diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please welcome Dr. Underwood.
Thank you, Dr. Gloria, for that warm introduction. And hello, everyone. Great morning. It's an honor to commemorate Juneteenth 2021 with each of you, our family, our Commonwealth family, as we collectively acknowledge our deepest national wound, the emancipation of those enslaved in Texas, right here in Virginia, and generally in the United States. I'm honored to stand on this place, at this spot, here in Hampton, Virginia, at Fort Monroe, Old Point Comfort, which is one of the most significant historic sites connected to Virginia's role in the Middle Passage, the American slave trade, the contraband decision, and the final emancipation of those enslaved at Galveston, Texas. I must take a moment and thank many of you who were advocates and activists to make this day possible. Thank you to all of you, and a special shout out to Opal Lee at the national level. Please give yourselves a round of applause. Many of you in this audience today helped to make this day possible here in Virginia. As I thought about the significance of today here in Virginia and tomorrow around our nation, I was reminded that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, and we're living on those promises and prayers of those who came before us, very similar to a song that I know many of you know by Travis Green that contains the words, "You made a way." When our backs were against the wall and it looked as if it was over, you made a way. And we're standing here only because you made a way. You move mountains. You cause walls to fall. With your power, perform miracles. Today's event underscores a miracle. It underscores the importance of this first codified state and national holiday and the Northam administration's commitment, as Dr. Fairfax mentioned, to historic justice and telling a more complete narrative of Virginia's history. So now that Juneteenth is an official legal holiday, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion felt compelled to bring you here together to uniquely acknowledge this milestone here at Fort Monroe, even as we're all reckoning with how to do safe in-person events again. Thank you for social distancing. Ultimately, it is my great hope that at some point, the power of today will be revealed quietly in your spirit. For me, I felt a remarkable sense of energy almost come off the water during the ceremonial call to the ancestors. Thank you, Shadra Pittman. So I welcome you to reflect on your personal equity journey and Virginia's journey to Juneteenth as you think about the words from our state poet, Dr. Agloria, as you think about and listen to the songs that have been sung or are about to be sung, and the words from our upcoming keynote address from Governor Northam. And yes, we welcome you to continue to fellowship and reflect on our shared history that binds us together as you enjoy the food that has been prepared for you in a COVID-safe way. With the creation of the Governor's Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in 2019, Governor Northam made Virginia and positioned us as a national exemplar in addressing historical injustices that have existed for more than 400 years. We thank you, Governor Northam, for your leadership and strong commitment to addressing systemic barriers. And because iniquities exist, which we know stem from 1619 and the institution of American slavery, Virginia is now operationalizing equity throughout the Commonwealth in our COVID recovery, the launching of the One Virginia Plan, and as was mentioned, the creation of the first equity dashboards that actually synthesize structural racism across 6 determinants of health. In closing, today is just the beginning of our acknowledgement. The Commonwealth of Virginia declared racism a public health crisis, but we still have so much work to do to realize the One Virginia mission and address the larger crisis of racism, whose genesis began right here at Fort Monroe, Old Point Comfort. None of us can approach this work the same way in 2021. Now that we've lost millions of Americans, survived a worldwide pandemic, and have finally awakened to the 2020 calls for racial justice. So it's incumbent upon all of us to do our part. Will you join in? In what ways will you honor the ancestors? We must let our lives and collective love for one another move us to the next level. Now it is my esteemed honor to introduce Chelsea Jones to offer an amazing selection that I know will encourage us to continue to reflect on our personal and collective journey to Juneteenth. Welcome, Ms. Jones.
but time will heal. Heavy the load, the cross I bear. Lonely the road I trod, I dare. Shaken, but here I stand. Weary, still I press on. Long are the nights, the tears I cry. Dark are the days, no sun in the sky. Yet still I rise, never to give up, and never to give in against all odds. Yet still I rise, at times I feel alone, still sometimes I'm troubled, but not in despair. Struggling, make my way through. Trials they come to make me strong. I must endure. He
Don't put those hands together and help me thank Chelsea for that amazing rendition of Still I Rise. Good morning. I am Dr. Cheryl Ivy Green, Chair of the Virginia African American Advisory Board, created by Governor Northam in 2019. It is truly my honor this morning to participate in today's Juneteenth commemoration and represent the Virginia African American Advisory Board. This is especially so because the board is laser focused on many of the issues our Commonwealth is reckoning with today. So we welcome the work that we are doing in partnership with Governor Northam as we address issues and the needs in the African American community. Now, I have this awesome task of introducing our keynote speaker. Many of you already are familiar with his bio, but I am so pleased to share with you this morning that in addition to being an Army doctor, pediatric neurologist, business owner, senator, and lieutenant governor, Governor Ralph Northam, the 73rd governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia, has a genuine heart for people and shares his love for Virginians, in particular, those that guide his every decision. Governor Northam is committed to building an inclusive Virginia where everyone feels welcome to live, to learn, to work, to visit, and to thrive. He wants what we all want, and that is a Virginia that works better for everyone, no matter who they are or where they live. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the 73rd Governor of Virginia, my friend, His Excellency Governor Ralph Northam.
You are wonderful. Thank you so much. Wow. Well, hello, everybody. And welcome to Fort Monroe. Dr. Ivy Green, thank you so much, number one, for your kind introduction and words, but also for your leadership, all the wonderful work that you have done for this great Commonwealth. Please give Dr. Ivy Green a round of applause. And what a beautiful day God has given us to be here today. You can just feel the history that surround us. I want to thank Dr. Fairfax, Dr. Underwood, and Dr. Gloria for your powerful words. Please give them another round of applause. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Glenn Oder and Fort Monroe for hosting this event today. Secretary of Natural Resources, Matt Strickler, and especially Dr. Underwood and your team for all the work that you put into this today. This is a wonderful and exciting day. This is, as has been said, a truly momentous day. Today, we commemorate Juneteenth, the day in 1865 that news of the Emancipation Proclamation had finally come to every state. In June of that year, the news arrived in Texas. After the Civil War ended, and 2 years after the proclamation was signed, finally, enslaved black people there heard the news that they were free. For many years now, black Americans have celebrated that freedom on Juneteenth with music, storytelling, dancing, foodways, fellowship, and remembering the ancestors, all of which we have experienced here today. We are marking this day here at Fort Monroe, the site of Old Point Comfort, where the first enslaved African people arrived on these shores in 1619. Now, remember that just a few weeks prior to their landing, up the road in Jamestown, white land-owning men had come together to establish a system of representative government. But that government did not represent everyone who lived under it. Not then, and not during 246 years of slavery. Throughout American history, we've struggled to live up to our own ideals of freedom and justice for all. For the 402 years since 1619, when representative democracy and enslaved African people arrived in Virginia within a month of each other, we have said one thing, but we have done another. And we still struggle to form a more perfect union, to represent everyone who lives in this great but conflicted country that we all share. Commemorating Juneteenth is a step toward that representation. As Americans, we love to celebrate freedom. And the 4th of July, Independence Day, is a wonderful holiday. But the end of slavery, the beginning of freedom, also deserves to be noted and commemorated, not by Black Americans alone, but by every one of us. So let's just take a moment to reflect on the weight of what we're talking about, the end of slavery in the United States. We know it was not the end of racism or violence or black oppression. We know that Jim Crow terror and redlining and massive resistance and other forms of discrimination followed and exist today in 2021. We know we are still working our way toward that more perfect union. But it was the end of a brutal system in this country, a huge milestone in the United States. And we don't celebrate it in any other systematic way. We do not make a holiday out of the end of the Civil War, nor of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation. We don't celebrate the other incremental milestones that led to that day in the June heat of Texas, when the last enslaved African Americans learned finally that they were free. So it deserves and why this day. It matters because the end of slavery in the United States, and it matters because it says we all share it and we commemorate it. We're was
much going on. We're going to keep this.
I have been frank that I did not always understand the full history of how this has shaped it is in all of our best interest to know historically where we have been both individually and as a nation, and to have a compass
Also, they didn't
to
tell us
guide
about
us to a better and more equitable
the
future.
online stream until we got
That's
here.
why we have worked
You know,
to make
I was
sure
just like-
we're telling the true history
Oh,
of our
okay,
shared
great.
past.
Cool.
We ended, I'm going to repeat this, we ended 100 Confederate generals and replaced it with elections that we should all be proud of. And Congressman Scott and Congressman Loria, thank you for being here. But this is one of the proudest things that I think we have done. We took down a Confederate statue representing Virginia in the halls of Congress and will replace it with civil rights activist Barbara Johnson. That's something that deserves a round of applause.
I gotta turn this off.
First national monument to mark the landing of
Don't turn it.
enslaved African people.
So,
And comprehensively teach African American history. When we look back at the events of 1619 or 1865, we often look at them as history, frozen in time, dusty relics of the past. We memorize dates, but not connections. We don't teach the themes that appear in our history over and over again. We often fail to draw the connecting lines from those past events to our present day. But it is those connections that show us the full picture. Today, I am very proud to announce that the Commonwealth, your Commonwealth, is partnering with the Virginia Museum of History and Culture to distribute a book created by the museum around its exhibit, Determined, the 400-year struggle for black equality. The exhibit was at the museum in 2019, the year we marked 400 years since 1619 and the arrival of those enslaved Africans right here at Old Point Comfort. The exhibit drew connections across the following 4 years of the fight for black equality. The book expands on that narrative, providing a concise survey of black history in Virginia and putting it in the context to understand what an impact this fight has had on our nation and on our democratic ideals. Now, it's not simple, and it shouldn't be simple, to condense 400 years of complex history into an easily understood narrative. But Determined has managed to do just that. It draws those connections between the past and the present that we all need to understand. That's why we have agreed to partner with the museum to provide a copy of Determined to every high school, every middle school, and every library in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So I want to thank the Virginia Museum of History and Culture, along with VMHC curator and author of the book, Dr. Karen Sherry, and all of the other historians and partners whose work went into the making of this book. It is important for us all to better understand what has shaped who we are as a nation. That is why it's important that we mark Juneteenth. And I want to especially thank Senator Mamie Locke and Delegate Lamont Bagby, who proposed the legislation to create the state holiday. Senator Mamie Locke from Hampton, Virginia, please stand up and deserve a round of applause. And in fact, Congressman Scott and Congressman Loria, just yesterday, President Biden and Vice President Harris officially signed legislation to follow our example and make Juneteenth a federal holiday as well. I don't know about you, but I think that is great news, and we are all moving together in the right direction, commemorating a turning point in American history, the end of slavery, the
Okay, so let's, because the way the
we have to remember this. The past is not that far
light's
away.
not great
It
anywhere.
touches us today,
I
and
think,
it affects
going this way, so
tomorrow.
it's backlit.
We
Yeah.
must always embrace a full understanding, not shine away
oh,
from
should I
the
just use that
ugly
actually?
or
Yeah.
painful
Yeah.
parts, so that we can all move forward.
Okay. Sounds good, thank you. I think we're good. They just told us whenever Governor